Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aranda Jayakrama, and I have the great pleasure of introducing Bill Chopik. Bill is one of the leading personality scientists doing research right now.
Really?
I think so.
Oh.
In my view. And we're very lucky to have Bill here today with us. He's going to be talking about the emergence of honesty in individual, dyadic, and group settings.
Great,
Welcome,
thank
Bill.
you. Great, thanks. Yeah. Great. Thanks, everybody. It's really great seeing everybody. Such a really lovely group. Last year was so much fun, and it's been fun so far. Just want to start out by thanking people. So Rebecca Weidman's my postdoc, who'll be starting as an assistant professor in January. Mariah Purell, who's graduating. So if you have any jobs, hire her. That came from deep down what I wanted, but she'll be on the job market soon, and she's really exciting. Heywan has just finished her first year. And then Rich Lucas and Rob Ackerman have been really helpful in kind of conceptualizing these things. And then, of course, thanks to Templeton and the Wake Forest group for just funding us and having this really great environment for us to meet and talk about honesty. So for an outline, I'm going to recap last year's findings, which most of you probably didn't see, so it'll feel a little bit like whiplash, but if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm happy to stop and talk about it more. And then I'll talk about new stuff, which is a group where we had friends tell us how much their friends lie to them and each other, and if they're accurate or biased in those things. And then I'll tell you about a bunch of future things that we're planning after the grant period ends, but I wanted to tell you about stuff that the grant period has been able to kind of inspire in us. So I'm a social personality psychologist, so a lot of times I study honesty in terms of an individual difference construct where some people are more honest than others. Borrowing from a lot of definitions we've heard the last couple days, and also last year and throughout your whole kind of project periods, the idea is that you'd avoid distorting facts and being truthful in your thoughts and actions, although the exact indicators of this virtue and how it's manifest kind of vary in different settings and with different people. But in terms of outcomes of honesty, if you just ask people, are you honest, and then follow up to see how they do later in life, it looks like they are more autonomous, so they think they have control over their environments. They're more engaged, they have better school success, work success, and marital success, so they stay in relationships longer. Other studies are more critical about whether honesty makes you happy, so that's a different consideration entirely, if it makes you happy or healthier. So it's not necessarily linked to like you living longer, but it might bring you success in other domains in life. So the question with our project was, can people become more honest over time? And as someone interested in lifespan development, this is the idea that kind of drives a lot of what we do. So as you age, a ton of interesting things happen to you. So there are physical changes as you grow as a person physically, but then you find yourselves in all sorts of different social environments and are challenged in new ways that force you to grow in various ways. So this is Hugo, who took a photo of himself every year for 12 years to kind of see how he changed himself. And as you see, there's a lot of physical changes, but then also relational ones where at some point a romantic partner pops in the scene. Sometimes his parents yell at him to get off his computer. There's a sense in which we go through a lot of different changes. So one project part that was done last year was trying to map how honesty changed over time. And this is the stuff I'll go through really, really quickly. So we did what's called integrative data analysis project, where we pooled data from a bunch of different existing longitudinal data sets. So the name of the data sets are across the top of the table. The numbers in all the cells are how many people at that particular wave there are. And the year is actually when they're born. And the really cool thing is you can pool these data sets to estimate a really cool question like how honesty changes from, say, age 13 to age 77. But then you have people born in different historical periods. So one cool thing is you can actually see, hey, maybe growing up, say, during the Great Depression or just after World War II might set you on a different trajectory in terms of how your honesty changes. So there's a lot of different theories about honesty changing and why. A lot of it is that maybe being an honest person is rewarded over time. Basically, if you're outed as a pathological liar early in life, it might make for a bad move going forward. There's a lot of consequences to being dishonest. But one really cool thing about this study is that they're based entirely on observer reports. So all these data sets will read tons of reports about you, interviews you've given, self-report instruments, and they'll actually fill out a measure of honesty based on this kind of group of information. And what we find is when we combine all these data sets, we find that the degree to which people describe themselves as, or are described as candid tends to increase over time. So all these different colors are the different data sets. And you see there's this kind of not exactly linear, but upward trajectory where kind of we're rating older adults, middle-aged and older adults as more honest than younger adults. It also works if you ask it in slightly different ways, like how guileful or deceitful individuals are. Looks like over time that declines. So these data are really cool because you have intervals of time where we follow people over 40 years, the same people, and then also they're born in different kind of historical periods. But across all historical periods and all ages, it looks like people are being described as more honest. But that's how, clinicians or psychologists describe people. We also have some self-report data, and we initially proposed using this really large data set of internet participants who took part in a study to get feedback on their personality. So I think we originally proposed like 1 or 2 million people, which is really, really big. However, we ended up with 4.5 million people from 88 different countries. So each one of these countries had about 1,000 people in it. And they filled out a character strengths-based measure of honesty. So one thing I'm not really going to talk about today is you can do some really cool geographic and regional modeling of, say, where people at least say that they're the honest all over the world. But one cool thing is we can replicate, at least cross-sectionally, that compared to younger adults, middle-aged and older adults also say that they're more honest. So total strangers think you get more honest over time. Self-reports are saying you're more honest over time. The interesting thing is this pattern is kind of seen in all those different cultures. So there's not really a country in the world where older adults say that they're more dishonest than younger adults. But the really cool thing about a data set this large is that it took a really long time to collect. So just by virtue of collecting data for 20 years, you can actually compare what are called age, period, and cohort effects within the same data set. And what I mean by that is that when you collect a large data set over a long period of time, you just get a bunch of random people of different ages taking it every year. So for example, you'll get an 18-year-old and you can compare them to a 60-year-old, like in that graph I just showed you. There's also a sense in which you just keep getting 18-year-olds and 60-year-olds every year. So you can actually compare people throughout the study window, say like this year during COVID, or say earlier in 2002. How are 18-year-olds different? But then you have people that are born in the same year but collected in different years. So you might be able to say, what's it like being a 36-year-old in 2020 versus 2002? So basically, there's all these sort of mixes and matches. And if you're not confused by now, it's called a cross-classification problem, where when you're born, how old you are, and when you exist in time are all the same number. So what you can do is an age period cohort analysis where you can, sorry, I'm just breezing through all this, but you can basically decompose variance in terms of how much is explaining it. Maybe what is explaining it is the year you're born, or maybe what's explaining it is you're living in COVID right now, or what's explaining is it you're a 35-year-old and that's a really weird time. Maybe that's what's explaining it. So we asked a series of questions. I'll just give you the answers. So again, older adults said they're more honest. When you were born didn't really matter. So if you're looking to blame millennials or Gen Z or baby boomers for being super selfish, looks like that's not generally the case. However, one thing is that people who took the survey more recently say that they're more honest. So at least at this level over a 20-year period, again, the effect is pretty small, but it looks like more recent survey takers are saying that they're more honest. But the big thing I want to talk about today, and that was kind of all stuff from last year, is a little bit about where honesty comes from and how we judge honesty and dishonesty. So the last year, we've actually been collecting quartets or quads of friends where we'll get them to come to the lab and they'll rate each other on all sorts of honesty-related characteristics. So I'll show you a ton of honesty measures today and what people think of their friends. So we're going to use something called the social relations model, and it can get a little bit complicated, especially if you're not really familiar with these designs or analyses. So I came up with a really accessible example. Just imagine any group of 4 friends. It doesn't matter how they met or how far in time they go back. Just let it happen. We're really close. We're all having really great summers right now. So there's a sense in which we bring 4 people in the lab, and then they give ratings of each other. So in our case, it's honesty, but we also have, like, do you think your friend is weird? That's in the data set. Do you think your friend is ready for a long-term relationship? There's actually a lot of agreement on that question. But the cool thing is we have data on all 4 friends rating each other. So one cool thing is you can isolate, say, the relationship 2 people have with one another and how they would read each other. But then you also have some degree of consensus about one person. So if we all think one person is really, really weird, we can actually get some degree of agreement on that, or if someone's really honest or someone's really dishonest. The thing about honesty is that when you try to define it as a construct in the real world, part of what we all kind of guide in who's honest is if other people tell us that they're honest, right? Or we have, interactions with them over time and we judge them as being honest or dishonest. So actually this measure called consensus is really relevant for honesty-related research. But there's also a sense in which when we're making judgments about other people, we can be delusional in really weird ways. So for example, we have ratings of one person rating their whole group, and we can actually tell if they're biased or giving systematically different answers in strange ways. So is there something about coloring your judgment that other people are, say, more objective? And then again, because we have all these ratings, we can see maybe you're particularly delusional about this relationship, but objective about others. Or maybe we can kind of quantify the degree to which you're really, really off when you're saying if someone's honest or not. So that's the design of the thing we've been doing the last year. So to break it down in very superficial terms, when you rate someone in terms of how honest they are, it's comprised of 3 components, and this is what the social relations model is. So one is how you perceive others in general. So this is if you're delusional and if you just think everybody's honest, if you're a little naive about the world perhaps, you are just very, very trusting. How that target is generally perceived. So if you have a really, really honest person in your network and they're just super honest and they're a really wonderful person, if they're Robert Oppenheimer, I don't know, that's not a great example, but if we all think that they're an honest person, there's a sense in which that guides how you judge them. Hey, I've had this whole history. We've all had this whole history with him that we think he's honest. And then there's this unique relationship you have with that exact person. So, you could be delusional, everyone could love them, but then there's something about your vibe and your shared history that is explaining why you're rating them the way they are. That fight you had 10 years ago. That's what that particular construct is going to be sucking up. So to give you an example, there's a trait called extroversion, which is how outgoing you are. And if you wanted to split up the numbers in terms of what's explaining it, and these numbers will all add to 100 today, it looks like the target variance, which is us being able to say, oh yeah, that person over there, that's an extrovert. They're super outgoing. Honestly, in a crowd, you can usually tell who the most outgoing, loud, extrovert person is. But then there's some degree in which people might rate all people in their network based on maybe a working theory of the world. And then also there's this relationship variance where there is something about your relationship with them which is making you say, oh yeah, they're super outgoing because I hung out with them alone and with other people and we have our own shared history. So that's just extroversion. We have tons and tons of honesty-related measures. These are all of them. These are just some of them actually. So the first 3 are single items. These are pulled from the surveys I showed you earlier in the presentation. And then there's this broadened scale of honesty and humility that has a few different subscales. So we had them rate their friends on all of these characteristics. And actually one insight from the study is that there's some degree when people rate their friends as honest, there's some degree in which it has nothing to do with them as a person. It has to do everything with the person rating it. So again, that's the perceiver variance. That has everything to do with you and nothing really to do with your friend. And then there is a target variance, which is a little bit lower. So actually the really weird thing is when you're rating people and how honest they are, it looks like it has little to do with them, which is kind of scary and fascinating. But then the really insightful thing is that honesty is emerging as a relational phenomenon in which when you are rating how honest someone is, it has to do with your shared history and your unique perception of them and your relationship. Perhaps the most shocking one is this index of fairness. It's by far the largest. So when you're making judgments about if a person's fair in their dealings, it almost has to do with how you interacted with them in the past. It doesn't have to do with their reputation, doesn't have to do with you thinking everybody's fair or that you live in a wild jungle where no one should be trusted. It is really like your shared history with them. But the really fun thing about this study and things that we didn't even quite propose in the grant is that you can actually quantify different types of biases. So for example, there's one called the assumed similarity bias. And this is if you think you're an honest person, do you think everyone else is? And the answer is yes. And the effect is pretty big. So you're using stuff about yourself to make judgments about the world. And again, that's separate from the stuff that they do and your shared history. So you're basing your judgments of other people based on yourself and how honest you think you are. The really particularly interesting thing is when you just correlate what friends say about you and what you say about yourself. Those are self-other agreements. How much do you and others agree? The correlations are actually pretty low, which is a little bit shocking because there are honest acts that you witness and you've known these friends for kind of a long time, and yet there is this discrepancy where you're disagreeing on how honest you are with them. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. You can actually predict variation in this. Maybe it grows or shrinks based on how much you volunteer or your shared history with people. But the interesting thing is that I kind of misled you a little bit by showing you these different bar graphs, because those are just really averages. Like on average, this sample kind of uses your shared history in these ways. But when you actually plot the variability, there's tons of people who use these different indicators more or less. So the green is actually the mean of each of those effects, but then you see this variability where for a perceiver effect all the way to the left, there are some people who think that their friends are all liars and they don't trust them at all, and yet they're still friends with them. And then there are people who trust them entirely, or there are people who kind of agree or can't agree at all on whether or not their friend is really honest. So one thing we did is we used the truthful communication scale, which was generously provided by the organizers. They spent a lot of work trying to validate this scale. And we found that when we had people fill this out, it actually did predict the degree to which honesty was visible. So when you start to say, oh, if you start to answer yes to these questions, your friends are like, oh yeah, they're honest. So there was some scale validation already, but then you have all these additional observers saying like, oh yeah, that person's honest, and they think I'm honest. So there's some degree of like truth that we're kind of narrowing in on, where if you say you do a lot of honest things, your friends say you're honest, you think you're honest, that's what these kind of numbers are. So there's at least some degree of signal in the noise. So for a grand summary, to just put it all together, I know the models were pretty complicated, so thank you for bearing with me. So when you rate someone's honest, a lot of it has to do with your unique relationship with them. So it's not really your weird quirks or maybe everyone else thinking they're honest. Like, it has to do with your shared dynamic. The models are a little bit more complicated than what I presented. There's ways of modeling error in ways if you have, say, multiple observations of honesty, which we do. And you can also predict or split apart variance in different ways that way, which we're going to do. We sometimes use what we think about ourselves to judge others, which is consistent with a lot of things. When you ask people, I'm going to go visit Philadelphia, what should I do? They use their own judgment. And the same thing is true about how they rate their friend's personality. And then self-other agreement was pretty low. It's actually lower than other traits. And there's a theoretical contribution here where honesty might not be as visible as being a party animal when you walk into a group of people. You can see that, but you might not be able to see this virtue that doesn't always have the opportunity to shine in social situations. So in terms of upcoming plans, here was kind of the list of projects that are supposed to come out. That longitudinal change in honesty over, I think it's like a 64-year period across different generations. That was the first study I showed you. Cross-cultural differences and age differences in honesty, that age period cohort analysis. This social relations model, you can actually do a lot of really fun things. We measured all sorts of things you can predict honesty from. Possibly a measurement paper, because we have all these honesty metrics, and to a greater or lesser degree, people are kind of agreeing on some of those traits than others. So you can actually say, hey, maybe there's something about these measures. So if you want to do a study, you could maybe look at some things we're doing and say, oh, actually, it might be good to use this measure because it looks like it's picking up or people are agreeing on what they're saying. One thing I didn't talk about is and this was not connected to the grant, but something we wanted to do. We did an intervention study where we tried to make people more honest. And I know that's like an age-old question. We've been trying to do it, and others have tried to do it, and philosophers have investigated it. But what we did is we followed people every week for 16 weeks, and we gave them a series of different interventions to try to change their personalities. And that could be you engaging more authentically with people in your environment, being more outgoing, maybe trying to reduce social anxiety in some ways. Maybe people lie because of that. So that's something that'll come out of this project that wasn't originally planned, but we kind of added it on and did it kind of outside the scope. And then we've also finished a paper on the dyadic effects of honesty. If you're married to an honest person, is that good for you? And turns out it is, so don't seek out people who are really dishonest. I don't know if that's on your Tinder profile or whatever, but that could be a thing to think about when you're choosing a romantic partner. But overall, I just wanted to say thank you so much again. This wasn't my core area of research, but I think it's just been so fascinating the last 2 years to kind of get to know everybody and really inspire a lot of this work. So with that, I thank you again, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks.
Will and Kevin.
Hey. Well,
just fascinating, just, huge scope, massive, really great. So a technical question and then another question about truth. So, in terms of the technical question, who and how many subjects were the ones in the round robin?
Yeah, sorry. I skipped over a lot of crucial details. So that's 800 people. So there's 200 groups of 4, and all friends with each other. And they're from the local community. I think the average age is maybe like 28, so it skews a little bit younger. Some are students and some are community members.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
For a minute I was thinking it might have been the 4 million people. So, yeah. And then the question about truth is, so I detected in you a sort of an agreement with the field's general opinion that consensus is closer to the truth than self-report. And but then you get this interesting finding where it's the relationship that's the highest variance accounted for. So in that case, would you argue that the consensus is probably the best guess as to the person's actual honesty, or would you make a different conclusion?
I mean, it's really tough because, so we're only asking 3 observers who have they have a limited history with this individual. They don't have the totality of their inner thoughts and their intentions through which they enact their actions. So yeah, I think before this project and with other characteristics, I thought, if everybody says you're a liar and they have total experience of you lying and over years and years and years, maybe you're a liar. Just from a practical perspective, just if you had to go on some sort of information, a lot of people who know you really well are describing you to me, and they have a bunch of multifaceted experiences. It seems worthwhile to trust it. I mean, the real mystery, though, is that shared relationship. The fact that self-reports of honesty do predict things is also mysterious, and it's not clear if maybe is mysterious. And I wonder if there's some other component that honesty is picking up on that is success in navigating social situations or professional situations. So I think if you had to press me, which you are pressing me, I would go with consensus, but then, what's explaining judgments are this relationship effect. And the cool thing is we can start to explain those things, because for those 800 people, we actually have 2,400 pairwise ratings where they're rating each other. So we actually have a ton of those dyadic interactions, and your perception of me differs from my perception of you. Like, we have the same relationship, but I have wildly different perceptions of it. So the cool thing is we can just start to predict that. So I don't have a great answer, but it's really, it was a surprise to us as well. And not all traits follow that. This is honesty, so thanks.
Thanks so much, Bill. This is fascinating stuff. I had a question about the self-other agreement, particularly the as I heard it, you saw stronger self-other agreement among people higher on truthfulness?
The truthful communication scale.
Okay.
The overall composite of that variable.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if this is calling for analyses that are possible, or if it's calling for speculation. But what do you think is being reported differently among people higher in this scale? What is it? Is it I'm accurately reporting on my own, thus other people's perceptions match better, or am I better about everyone's perceptions of everyone, or what?
Yeah, it's kind of cheating, right? So the whole study is about friends rating each other, and then I say, hey, this thing that they said about themselves is predicting stuff, which, again, the reason we did the study is so we wouldn't have to rely on stuff that they say about themselves, because are people fully honest about how honest they are? And the truthful communication scale is actually a little bit better than other, to compliment you, a little bit better than other honesty measures, in the sense in which it does capture some of the evaluative components that, like, honesty is a good thing, but then it also captures at least some behavioral intentions, which not all honesty measures do. So we do have these subscales, which I did run, but I forgot literally everything about it. But there is a sense in which there is some like differential validity depending on the subscales. So some of the subscales are more value oriented, and then some are behavioral. And the idea is that probably the behavioral stuff might predict self-other agreement growing, because presumably then I see you doing a bunch of honest stuff, and then I'm like, oh, Caleb's honest. So that's what I think is different, maybe, is that you're kind of getting a little bit closer to honesty as a behavior rather than honesty as this like ideal, fluffy-dovey, loving world, like it's amazing. So that would be my hypothesis.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Bill. That was awesome. I have a question about one of your results, the fact that people rate other people's honesty kind of by means of how they're rating their own.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's unique to honesty, or do you think it might be a more general phenomenon? And part of what I have in mind is like these results from theory of mind research, that there's an egocentric bias where if I represent myself as believing it, I'm going to kind of represent you as believing it. It looks plausibly like it could be a kind of generalization of that, but I was interested to hear what you thought the explanation for that might be.
It is not specific to honesty. So we also have humor in the data. If you think you're hilarious, you think your friends are hilarious. If you think you use this type of humor style, you think your friends also make these types of jokes. It's true of personality. It's true of like relationship insecurity. So I project my insecurities onto others. So it's actually not specific to honesty at all. And yeah, that generalist kind of egocentric bias is thought to be driving it. Luckily we can predict variability in that. So, we have tons of measures about how happy they are with their friends, how much they fight. And like, one thing might be this egocentric bias is larger if you're getting along with your friends a lot. Like yourself, you extend yourself more if stuff is going well. Rather, if you're always fighting with your friend's kind of a jerk, you actually distance yourself more from them psychologically. And there's some relationship stuff, theories about that. But no, so one good thing about doing this project is that the fact that we found that was kind of a comfort, because other stuff does show that.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Candice, Emma,
Thank you. This is really interesting. And I have a question about the self-other agreement.
Yes.
So you mentioned that was low in this study and lower than other kinds of traits like
Yep.
extroversion.
Yep.
Part of that you mentioned was that extroversion is so easily observable. But do you see more variability in ratings for things like extroversion than about things like honesty?
Yeah.
So I'm imagining if I were rating Talia, my collaborator, on extroversion, I know she's on a 7, and I'm like on a 3 on the scale of 1 to 7.
I've noticed that, yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
right? So,
Huge
but-
consensus.
But for honesty, like the honesty scale, I don't give as much variability in terms of it. It's not as, I'm not using the full range of the scale, I don't think as much, unless somebody's just blatantly an a-hole.
Right, yeah. That's entirely possible, but we didn't do it.
So do you have the descriptives? Like, do you see, well, just if you look at the raw descriptives in terms of the means and standard deviations for these trait measures,
Yeah.
do you see drastically more variability for traits like extroversion than you do for something like honesty?
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, like the variability shrinks with more observable traits because there's more consensus and there's perhaps more criterion, like, there's a sense in which things are more observable or not. And then there's also like a narrower ranges of behavior that serve as a criterion for something. So Talia being extroverted, there's a few things that are very specific to that. But something like neuroticism is actually a lower or not as visible trait, right? Like you could be anxious but be pretty like cool. Like I'm terrified now, but I'm dead on the outside. And that's like a behavioral indicator that is a little bit mismatched from the internal state. So not only the kind of range of criterion behaviors, but then also the visibility of it's different. And then, yeah, you'll see honesty, the answer to the question is yes, where the standard deviation's wider. But one interesting idea we had for a paper was just like, hey, here's the 80 traits we measured. Here are the different variance components. Here's how the variance looks across different ratings. And we think that might just be useful, so when people look at it, they're like, oh, yeah, actually, not only do people agree more on that, they agree more kind of homogenously. So yeah, your intuition's right.
Yeah, this is a short, kind of very related question related to observability. I wonder if there's a way to look at whether there's more consensus on the negative end of honesty scales than positive, right? Like, even within this room, we have so much disagreement about what high honesty is,
Sure.
right? Like, and how we use that term.
Yep.
But if there's a lot of consensus, both conceptually and probably observably,
Yeah.
in what, dishonesty is.
Yeah. Yes, so you can split up different scales. So one illustrative is that one self-report was just how candid, honest they are, how guileful they are, deceitful, which would be like the valence difference. So, I mean, in this particular, oh wait, sorry, this is a correlation of a correlation. Sorry, if that's not confusing. Here you go. So guileful, super low, but candid, relatively higher. But then you have other things like honest, which is just a really straightforward thing. And then all of these things are varying degrees of valence, like greed, avoidance, but sincerity is positive. But the really cool thing about social relations model is you can actually add single indicators into things, and you can kind of push around the degree to which things are explained. So yeah, you can actually then add self-report measures, so you get the high versus low, as predictors of these things. So that exact thing is testable. Yeah, we just didn't do it.
See. Really, really interesting talk. I just wanted to again follow up on these discussions about honesty as a relational phenomenon.
Yep.
There's some of those, I think, interesting conclusions from your talk. And it seems to me that it's coming out, the zeroing that comes from the fact that honesty may not be as observable. And so if you're close with someone, you observe them more, and you can tell whether or not they're honest. But another possibility is that honesty is a very situational phenomenon. So maybe I'm honest at work, maybe it's honest at home, or vice versa. And so the nature of my relationship with the perceiver influences their assessment. So is there a way to disentangle those two in your data?
A little bit, yeah. So yeah, for sure. So all these things are kind of situationally contingent, where your behavior across all sorts of domains will differ. Like me in work context is very different than me in personal contexts and romantic contexts and context with your kids or context with your pets, all sorts of different contexts. The cool thing, though, is we have a little bit of data on where the friends met and the nature of their relationship. And it's actually way more mixed composite than you think. So it's not like they all just met in school and were friends for 40 years. So it's mixed both between friend groups and within friend groups. So these two people met at work, but then they dragged these two friends in through another mutual friend, and that's how they became friends. But then you have these two people are friends from work, or these two friends met through this person's spouse. So actually you can add that as a predictor to see maybe that moderates some of the self-other agreement or these relationship effects. So yeah, the origin, how people met is good. You could maybe extrapolate it to how often do you interact with these people in different settings? So if you spend 90% of the time we spend together is at Templeton conferences in North Carolina, that's different than other friendship arrangements we have, right? So perhaps it's attributable to that. So you can do imperfect tests of it, but what you really want is to target different context from the beginning, and we just didn't do that, but it's possible. Yeah, thank you for that.
Really good. And then,
Go ahead.
sure. Oh, okay. Mine's pretty quick, I think. So I'm curious if you measured relationship strength, between individuals in your groups of 4, and if so, is relationship strength predictive of agreement?
When you say strength, do you mean how close I am, or how much I like you, or how much we interact?
How much? Oh.
All.
I think all of the above a little bit, but how much I like you,
Okay.
how well I know you might be the best one.
Yep, so we have duration, and actually that was weirdly not related to a lot of this stuff, which, again, I started out this theory by telling you, the more we interact with people, we should see more of their behavior and more of their character, and that's not predicting a lot of stuff. So yeah, liking, you tend to give more positive ratings to your friends if you like them, and it's unclear why that happens. So do you like them more because they're honest, or do you have this positive halo effect of their honesty? The cool thing about this, though, is you can model all those things simultaneously. So the degree to which I'm delusional about how much I love my friends is also correlated with the degree to which I think that they're honest. So you can actually model a lot of those things simultaneously. We didn't do that much. We just entered it in as a main effect predictor of things. But yeah, the co-occurrence of perceptions is something you can model. So that's a bivariate social relations analysis. Yeah, you can do that. And we have all these different facets of friendship strength and things too, how much do they get on your nerves? How much do they help you with practical things? And that's different than how much do you like them? But yeah, we asked them a lot of questions.
Will and Tara.
So, as far as I understand the social relations model, actually it seems to me that what Emma was saying could explain the relationship variance. So it's really your idiosyncratic theories.
Sure.
As long as people instantiate those theories differently. So if I have the theory that honesty is based on how much eye contact you make, for example,
Yeah.
then I'm going to rate the people that make a lot of eye contact as highly honest, the ones who don't make any eye contact as. So it is still a quirk, idiosyncratic quirk about
Sure.
my theory of what honesty is that's driving those relationships rather than the actual relationship they're having.
Yep. I mean, so luckily we have a bunch of different indicators, so we could, that was sort of the measurement idea at the end, where like maybe there are these indicators that it's either a methodological explanation for explaining why we rate that, which would also be really fascinating to kind of show. But then also maybe it's the valence, maybe it's the particular behavior. So I mean, luckily if you just enter in these as like single indicators, there's some assumptions you make when you do something like that, like eye contact means the same as something else, like they're equal contributors. But actually you can formally test that too if eye contact matters more. So it's just how crazy you want to get with like, because single items aren't super, or there's a lot of error involved with them, but technically when you enter in sets of them in different arrangements, yeah, you could start to pinpoint some methodological things that are driving why we think each other are honest. So, yeah.
One of the earlier findings with the hexagon assumed similarity that I always thought was interesting was that we assume more similarity on trait relevant to our values, so they call it honesty, humility, and openness to experience, and so we more assume similarity on those traits compared to others. So I was curious if you replicate that finding or had insights based on this work.
Yeah, we didn't formally measure like how important or core each of these values was to add as a predictor. We can add, there's self-reports of if that's a degree to which you value it, is if you also think you're high in it and you spend a lot of time trying to be honest and it occupies your thoughts all the time. You can add that as a predictor, but unfortunately we didn't do that type of, we didn't ask those particular measures to test something like that.
Did you have the whole hexagon model? Because I guess the basic finding they had was that there's more assumed similarity on openness to experience and honesty, humility compared to the other hexagons.
Oh yeah, we can do that. Right now. That's easy enough. But yeah, I thought you were meaning, did we formally ask like how much they value something?
I think both are interesting.
Yeah, sure.
It was more of a curiosity
Yeah.
of that finding, which is one pairs, right? You're
Sure.
able to test it much more broadly.
Right, across constructs. Yeah, so we can definitely do that. And then for some of the traits, we also, this is a totally separate thing, we assessed meta perception. So like, how do you think about the way your friend thinks about you? And that was way too complicated for, this was annoying enough, I think, for a lot of people. But that's another thing too about kind of this theory of mind thing that was brought up earlier and kind of how we think about how our friends think about us. And that might also vary across these indicators and these kind of the emotional value of positive versus negative. So so we can reproduce that analysis. Yeah.
Hi. So thank you for your really interesting talk.
Thanks.
I'm wondering whether the strong perceiver effect could be due also in part to the fact that the people are honest about honesty in low-stakes situation. But the fact that you are here with 3 friends, that they are all going to judge you, may not be a low-stakes situation.
Yeah, so it's hilarious you say that because there's actually some relationship stuff, and Bonnie knows it, where it's like, who are the people you bring into your study? Well, you had to A, have friends, B, they had to like you enough to spend an hour together in East Lansing coming to the lab. So there is this weird selection effect, and we see it with romantic relationships where the people relationships are pretty healthy if they're willing to like do something like this study. So, and that's true of like a lot of psychological things, believe it or not, even like less relational stuff like this. So, I will say there are still friends who don't like each other in the data set. So it is a question of if you're lopping off so much variability that it starts to compromise some things. But, luckily enough, we do have friends saying that their friends are liars. So, yeah. But yeah, your point is taken. Yeah.
Yep.
Please.
You mentioned you had an intervention study. You didn't get to speak much about it, so I'm curious to hear more. And one sort of question related to that that I didn't think you wanted to intervene on honesty. Part of it is a motivation, right, and part of it is skill to do that, communicate better. So I was curious how you structured your intervention and was it how effective?
Yeah, so it was actually really interesting. So we've done a bunch of different types of intervention studies. Like we'll say, like, is there something that you want to improve on? And then we'll give you an intervention to do that. We've also done this kind of dishonest thing where we ask people what they want to improve on, and then we'll give them the wrong intervention on purpose to see if it still works, and it does. So with the honesty stuff, a lot of it was like reducing social anxiety. There was also some stuff about targeting relational elements and self-kindness, like loving kindness. Some of this is rooted in like positive psychology interventions that we were targeting. But then there was like an authenticity one that kind of gave weekly goals to kind of interact with friends in a more honest and forthright way. And it's really, yeah, I buried the lead. We have, I think, like 1,600 students followed over those 16 weeks, and then they were randomly assigned to this weekly intervention. And the idea is that, so we finished that up like 3 or 4 months ago, and we were waiting to do a follow-up now, like 3 or 4 months later. But yeah, so yeah, to get more specific, some of the daily tasks ended up being something like, when a friend asks you for your opinion, give it honestly, no matter how much you think it would hurt their feelings. Or if there's something that you have ethical reservations about, communicate them to other people. So there are things like that, and then we have this weird feedback system where we ask them if they did it and how difficult that thing was. So we kind of have evaluations of that as well. So it was really like a first attempt to try to do something like that. So it's very imperfect, but then we're going to see if it worked soon, hopefully. So yeah, those are some of the details.
Thank you so much.
Cool. All right, thanks everybody.